Thank you, everyone. Excited to be here. All right. Welcome. It's bright. This is a Netflix comedy special. Awesome. So we're here today to talk about auxiliary markets, and you would not be alone if you asked what that means. So basically, anything that's not center of plate. So obviously, beautiful marbled steaks and perfect chicken breasts are big goals for the industry, but if we want to change the food system as a whole, if we want to see animal agriculture reduced at scale, there are a lot of other categories that use animal products. So Joshua had this great idea, so all credit to him. But Joshua, would you like to tell us a little more about what inspired you?
Sure, thank you, yeah. I had run a pet food startup for the last 6 years, Cultured Meat Pet Food, and I had a saying that went, I think is pretty genius. A lot of people don't understand it immediately, but I'll explain it, is that dogs don't watch the Super Bowl, which means they don't watch the game and the quarters and the halftime, of course, but more so the ritual of the Super Bowl, the ceremony, the American annual event where you order a 17-foot sub or chicken wings and meat lovers pizza and all that stuff. I mean, I'm Canadian, so I don't know, but I assume that's what Americans do. Dogs don't put that sort of ritualistic value on the Super Bowl. They also don't eat turkey at Thanksgiving, or they don't expect to. They don't, have a roast on Sunday. All these things are sort of ritualistic, traditional events, and they're centered around, a lot of times, food, and a lot more times meat. And when I think about pets in particular, they don't have that sort of expectation. The ritualistic expectation is not a part of their identity. It's not emotional. It's not tied in with their national pride. Like if you're at a 4th of July celebration and you're eating carrot sticks, it doesn't happen for a reason because it's part of a tradition. So dogs don't have that tradition. Their tradition is they go to their bowl every morning, every night, or all day. It depends on how you feed them. And I thought, what if we were able to take out that meaning from the foods that, as cell-like producers, we were making? What if a steak wasn't tied into masculinity or the food product, or wasn't tied into being American or being or celebrating or religion or anything like that, the Super Bowl? What if we looked at markets where there wasn't that importance, and you sort of lower the stakes a little bit and lower the temperature on the culture? And that's what we were talking about when we were talking about auxiliary markets and things with kind of lower expectations around them, and less of, I think once you get to those auxiliary markets, you'll find less resistance. And that's less resistance from consumers, and I think less resistance from lobby and the big industry.
Yeah, and that's where we get into, I mean, as we heard this morning, no one wants to be part of a culture war, right? We want to be part of the larger industry. We want to solve the problems and create sustainable solutions for all people. And auxiliary markets, Josh and I think, can provide a space where it's not so much a feeling of they're coming for our steaks, right? And obviously there are many groups in this country and other countries that have a vested financial, political interest in continuing the status quo. So as we continue to advocate for cultured meat and other forms of alternative protein as the mainstream options, how could we also enter in a way that causes less tension and it's kind of lower hanging fruit proof of concept? So one story we had talked about was margarine, which I think is a really interesting example, because that's something that's so common today, right? You can go into any grocery store and get it, but when it first came out, it was a big deal in Wisconsin, which is obviously big dairy land.
Yeah, that's right. When we talked about industry initially, that's what where my mind went, is the history of margarine. And it was invented as a way to save money on, because butter is an animal product. So during the various boom and bust cycles of the world in World War I and World War II, they developed the idea of margarine that they could use without animal fat necessarily. But that didn't go over well with the dairy industry, especially in Wisconsin, in other states as well, big dairy states, New York, where I'm from in Ontario. They didn't allow margarine to be the same color as butter up until like 1995. And I think Quebec is like even in the 2000s. They wanted it a different color altogether. And some states even mandated that margarine had to be pink in color to make it less appetizing. This is the kind of the games that were played to get people away from eating margarine and back to eating an animal product that was profitable and provided a lot of the economic benefits. So that's like from the kind of the industry level. But we're also looking at it, and we talked about this too, is from a really ground up level. And I was thinking auxiliary markets and auxiliary marketplaces, which got me thinking of like gas stations or convenience stores, which are loaded with meat products, and virtually no plant-based competition either. So I was looking at the Slim Jim. Does everyone know what a Slim Jim is? You snap into a Slim Jim.
Jerky.
Yeah. It's a pepperette, essentially, a fermented sausage in a free shrink wrap. The Macho Man was its spokesperson for a long time. Hope people are remembering this. Anyhow, it does like the annual revenue of $600 million or something a year, sold almost exclusively at 7-Elevens and gas stops, and it's basically a lower grade meat. So 8 grades of USDA meat. It's the Slim Jim uses it like the bottom 3 or the bottom 2. And it's so heavily seasoned and has so much else in it that I thought, what an opportunity, because you've got this meat product that sells very well, fast-moving consumer product. People are less interested in what is in it, obviously, because I don't think a lot of people know it's the lowest grade of meat that's in there, or what else is in there. There's virtually no competition from plant-based or anywhere else. The people that eat these dried meat products, and I think you had the number on the sales of them, but they're impressively high. They're not something that's hotly debated over in terms of cattle production and the beef industry. They are definitely part of it, the animal agriculture, but a smaller part, and one that could be, given the amount of meat that actually goes into them, could be a kind of, as you say, a low-hanging fruit or less intensive, a scientific endeavor, less intensive marketing to get that into stores, into like your gas stop or whatever. So that was one thing I've been looking at a lot and trying to understand how that marketplace works and how it could sort of be upended in a way that is less friction around it than a steak, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the center of the plate, so to speak, just holds a lot of emotional pull for both people and for companies and for retailers, honestly. My background is in big box retail in the U.S., and those category managers and buyers have a very different relationship with the product than something like a meat snacks category manager who most likely oversees multiple different categories and just kind of views a different eating occasion. So as Josh was saying, I've got some numbers for you. So here are just a few categories that could be interesting for CellAg. So cookies, obviously, used dairy products, 9 billion, baby food, 6.5 billion, soup, 6.5 billion, pastries, 4 billion, sauce, 3 billion, shelf staple meat and seafood, both 3 billion. So all in total, and these are markets for, or numbers for total U.S. retail. So this is retail alone, 52 billion in all auxiliary markets that I could think of in 2021. So 5% share of that is 2.6 billion, 10% is 5 billion, and 20% is 10 billion. So obviously, really large opportunity that a lot of you could probably get involved in with minimal competition and lower effort. And I want to mention, as I was saying, from the retailer's perspective, when you're presenting this opportunity, it's also a quite different dynamic. So obviously, cost and margin are always going to be of number one priority to any buyer. But the stakes are also a bit lower, so to speak, for I guess, shall we say, more processed products. That doesn't need to be a bad word. So a lot of products like Slim Jims, for example, already have long ingredients lists. Slim Jim even uses fermentation in their production process. And so the category manager is both expecting that. They're expecting more of a mysterious, in some regards, or novel production process, and the consumer is as well. So, how can we take advantage of that air of mystery, so to speak, and bring in this new production method while also revolutionizing it and saying, no, this is transparent, this is just meat, it's not 50 different spices and who knows what. So I think that's an interesting opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. You look at it's different consumer criteria.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've heard in opposition to cultured meat from the meat sector and consumers is it's not natural, or it's not like it's processed, or how many ingredients constitute a cell egg cut of meat, things like that. But you have to think, like, are people asking those questions of a can of chili that they would buy, any shelf-stable meat? They're likely not. They're likely not looking at the integrity of the ingredients in those shelf-stable items. So they're not looking at what grade of meat, or they're not looking at, where the meat or chicken would come from, whether it was free range or not. That sort of stuff comes when you're battling for the center of the plate. And also with that comes higher standards, basically, in consumer criteria. So if I'm ordering a steak at a restaurant, which is, we keep saying steak, but, put in your salmon or your other cut of meat, you've got certain criteria that you're going to have to hit, especially if it's a restaurant, especially if it's a high-priced item, which seems to be what a lot of cultured meat companies are aiming for initially, is going for high-end part of the market. But the mid and low market places, there's less emphasis on everything, basically.
Yep.
So ingredient integrity or experience or anything like that. And the experience, there is some sort of emphasis on, but it's easy to emulate. Mm-hmm. And as you look further and further into those marketplaces, and you see like what consumer is buying these items, it tends to be younger people. I think Slim Jim in particular is having a problem retaining customers as they grow out of their Slim Jim years or whatever. So you've got younger men enjoying Slim Jims, and then they kind of age out of it. And that's a good place to get someone started, especially men, as I said, because meat is inextricably tied to masculinity. If you get those consumers young with auxiliary products, they're not changing their dinner, they're not changing their Super Bowl, they're not changing their Thanksgiving, they're changing their gas stop snack. So when you think of it that way, you think of it as sort of a starter into an industry of infinite possibility.
Yeah.
So that's basically what we were looking at in terms of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think as you said, it's an interesting way to kind of bring people into the fold with lower risk. So it's easier to change a smaller customer behavior, right? Because of the emotional resonance of center plate foods, it's going to be a lot larger risk to the customer if they buy it and don't like it from a financial perspective, from a, what am I going to serve for dinner perspective. It's just, it takes up a lot more of their life and of their mind space, right? But if you're stopping at a gas station, you're much more likely to try. And those convenience locations are actually really interesting opportunity because those are some of the places where trial is the highest, or in grocery store checkout lanes, for example. That's a great way to drive trial. So I think if we can bring these people into the fold, so to speak, we might see easier adoption later on. And I think that it's also really interesting to look at this opportunity from a size of prize perspective, right? So I'm wondering how many of you in the audience, how many cultivated companies have taken into account the market potential for these products, which you could probably make pretty easily with your existing technologies. So could be a great way to increase your potential revenues as well.
There's also, like, I sort of glossed over competition, which is big. But when you think of competition, one of the main speaking points that we hear about from analysts who are trying to explain what's going on in the plant-based meat sector today and how it's losing a little bit of steam in the grocery store. They look at competition. How many plant-based burgers are there on the market right now, proprietary burgers? The market can't sustain 20 plant-based burgers that have, small different points of differentiation. So, we as an industry, I think, should look at that very critically. And if that's one of the contributing factors to the sort of plant-based meat conundrum that's happening right now, if that is one of the factors, would we want to replicate that? Would we want to do the same thing and have 10 of us, 15 of us doing burgers or steaks or whatever it might be, when we know we're going to be competing for the same market in the same ocean, so to speak? And that's why, again, auxiliary markets, one of the things that Colt looks at is the industry as a full, the field, and how to build this ecosystem. And that can't be the case if all the companies are working on the same products. So there's got to be a little bit of a diversification in the field. And I don't know if anyone's going to volunteer to do other sort of auxiliary low-cost meats. We want to hear from you. But it's a way to advance the field. If there's cell ag, bringing cell ag into everyday life, which is not just at a high-end restaurant or at the frozen food section.
Yeah, and that really brings me back to our keynote this morning as well, which I really enjoyed, about how, we're on track to have about 20 really successful companies, and that will only equal, I think it was 0.8% of total demand for meat, right? So where is the rest of that demand? Why are we not meeting it? I'm willing to bet that part of that is due to those similarities, in addition to the fact that obviously production facilities are very expensive. So I think that could be another interesting avenue to explore as we see more of these collaborative facilities coming up, is how can we also invite our traditional partners or people who have been involved in these markets to try things out, to innovate with us, because it's also lower risk for them. Maybe not necessarily a company that only makes, say, jerky, but most of these are owned by very large CPGs for whom these auxiliary markets are really only a small portion of their portfolio. So it would be easier for them to invest and to see year-over-year success that could encourage further participation. So I see we're almost out of time. So I guess to wrap up, Josh, any more thoughts about what this might look like? What do you think good next steps would be for people who might be piqued piqued their interest in this opportunity?
Well, I mean, depends how you want to build your products, but if you were to take a holistic approach of what someone eats during an entire day, and look at the markets that rely on animal agriculture. So I get back to my origins in pet food. There's never going to be a case, if we're all successful and in 15 years we eradicate animal agriculture from the human food system, we're not going to keep a separate animal agriculture system for pets. They're going to have to change as well. All these auxiliary markets are going to face changes if we are successful. So we're going to have to eventually work on them, now or later. So I guess my perspective would be, why not start to explore them now? Because, eventually, by force or by favor, everyone's going to be eating cultured meat, including people who eat at gas stations. So it's just a matter of time, I think. And I think the first movers in that space, in that convenience space, will do very well. So I think to sort of look at it theoretically, look at it that way, or is kind of interesting when you think of, what's going to happen to the food space overall, and where are these auxiliary markets going to land. Yeah.
So think of us next time you're at a gas station, and happy to answer any questions.
If you have any questions, please feel use the audience Q&A mic. And it seems like we have some folks going up to that microphone right now.
Hello.
Hello. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So one of the creative approaches, I mean, you guys have touched on it a little bit, is looking at companion animals. I mean, they consume almost nearly 1/3 of the meat that's produced, at least in the United States. And there is such a, dogs and cats don't care about texture. They don't care about the appearance. They care about the smell. They care about meat. And I am kind of amazed. As you know, I've been trying to do cultured meat for pets since I met you both back in 2016, 2017. I'm wondering why you think so many cultured meat companies are only focused on the high barrier of not gas stations, but high barrier of meat for humans at high-end restaurants, when there is a huge market out there for companion animals. That, there are going to be a couple companies that hit gold when they produce a slurry or a meat component that goes into pet food. And I am wondering why so many of these well-funded companies producing cultured meat for humans are not looking at the opportunity that we can take a leg out of the factory farming immediately by producing cultured meat for companion animals. There is a huge demand for it out there, but just no one's moving fast enough to hit that market. I'm just wondering why you think this is happening.
Well, I have another little story about that, I guess. And this is just lore. I don't know it firsthand, but the first burger, Mark Post, created the burger in, someone's got to help me out,
Maastricht?
2008? Yeah, in Maastricht in 2008. But the lore is they were trying to create a sausage. They're Europeans. They like sausages. But somebody said along the way, don't do a sausage. Americans don't eat that many sausages. What they eat is hamburgers. That's what you have to go for. So I think it's that, and that's a combination of market dynamics, what people buy, and impact. Because the majority of us, I assume, are doing this for, environmental reasons. So we want to hit impact, but we also want to, where can we make the most impact? It's generally where people are buying the most. But I would also say, and this is maybe slightly controversial, but you're looking for that high margin. The unit economics matters. You're looking for that higher margin item. But in terms of investment, which most of the companies in the space are venture backed, if not all of them, what will kind of turn on the light bulb in an investor's head? Investors who tend to be a certain demographic steaks. You know, they're not gonna see kind of dollar signs around other auxiliary, less kind of prestigious markets. And I think that's part of it, but also mainly it's the unit economics, mainly it's the consumption rates, and oh, I know about the pet food market. Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, I just want to add also, I think with all the scrutiny that's been on plant-based, we're at an interesting time for these auxiliary markets, pet food in particular, when pitching VCs, right? So I work with companies to prepare for fundraising and retail distribution, and a lot of the advice I'm giving right now is be more realistic, right? You know, we've seen these huge valuations for a long time, and yes, that is coming down, and that's a good thing because it means that we're heading towards something more sustainable. So I think while, you know, in the past 5 or so years, you're totally right. Investors have, you know, gotten starry-eyed from the stake, the big vision. In this moment of skepticism, we're at a great place to win with reality and showing those numbers and saying, look, here is what you stand to win from this market, because at the end of the day, it's all about returns.